when we're dealing with the issue of pluralism, it can sometimes almost seem theoretical because we think it's sort of ridiculous. How could people actually hold these contradictory views? So I just wanted to start with a little sample from a video by R.C. Sproul, Choosing My Religion. And this was conducted, I believe, in the 90s. They went to different college campuses and interviewed people and just asked them their opinions about religion. And so I think you might get a kick out of some of the answers here. Okay, I think that's enough of that. So it just gives you an idea that these are real opinions that people hold. So let's go back and work through a little bit of the terminology as we think about the issue of pluralism. And some of this will be review from the presentations and just maybe a little more formally stated. But universalism, that is one option. Everyone eventually will be saved. Now, maybe there's a time of purgatory or something, but eventually everyone will be saved. So technically, religious pluralism then teaches what? How would you state it?
One God, many roads.
Okay, many roads. It's a common way of thinking about it. They're equally valid. Often you will, if you read religious pluralists, and probably the most famous is a guy by the name of John Hick, famous in the scholarly community. He's written a lot to defend religious pluralism, but they will talk about this idea of each religion is a way to encounter or experience the ultimate. Now, they call it the ultimate because they don't want to say God, because that sort of assumes there is a God when some religions aren't really theistic religions. So this idea of the ultimate, whatever that is. Okay, so inclusivism. People are saved on the basis of Christ. So it's because of Christ's death on the cross, his universal provision that he's made for all people. But they're not necessarily saved through explicit faith in him. They don't necessarily even have to hear the gospel. God may reveal himself in saving ways through other religions or through nature. Okay, so that's inclusivism. Now, can I go to the next slide? Okay. Next one is exclusivism. This teaches, let's think of it broadly, first of all, that only one religion is true and the others opposed to it are false. So exclusivism can refer to other religions as well. For example, Islam is an exclusive religion. Muslims believe their way is the only way. Chris?
Sorry, I just had a funny comment about the inclusivism and religious pluralism, because I don't know where I saw it, but a little note, joke about this Catholic priest who came to India and said, you need to be saved, is how you do it. And the Indian said, wait a minute, so if you hadn't told me that, would I have gone to heaven? The priest says, yeah. So why in the world did he tell me?
Yeah. Yeah, so, right. Why do you need missions?
Right.
And Don, you answered, well, you told us how the inclusivists answer that, right? What were those answers? Jesus commands it, and because the blessing of the Christian life. Okay, so inclusivists don't oppose missions per se. They think we should still engage in it. Now, there is Christian exclusivism, and that is people are saved only through explicit faith in Christ, not some implicit faith. That is, you can be a Muslim and Christian and not know you're a Christian kind of thing. You have to hear the gospel and consciously respond to it and embrace Christ as Savior. This is probably the most common Christian view. If you want to see a discussion about these issues, one book would be 4 Views on Salvation in a Pluralistic World. You could get the different views from inclusivists and pluralists and exclusivists and etc. Now let's talk about some objections to Christian exclusivism. That's really what we deal with in apologetics. People get upset with you because you say Jesus is the only way. What are some of the objections to Christian exclusivism?
Narrow-minded.
Okay, very narrow-minded,
Arrogant.
What else would people say today about this idea that Jesus is the only way? Okay, it's not Christ-like, it's maybe not fair. Jeremy, is that what you're going to say?
Yeah, your God's not loving.
Okay, yeah. Right. Okay, let's work through some of these. First of all, arrogant. What would you say if someone says, well, that's arrogant to say that Christianity is the only true religion, that Jesus is the only way? That's arrogant.
Things can be correct without being arrogant.
Okay.
Like the video was talking about 2 plus 2 equals 4. Well, that's arrogant to say that that's the answer. Well,
Yeah.
no, it's just correct. It doesn't have to be arrogant.
Okay. Good. Lots of ways to illustrate this in real life, and I think that's helpful to do that, to show that real life works this way. Your example of the engine was good. What else might you say?
If they find out that we're wrong, or that if they find out that we're right, they would have wished that we did tell them. So.
Yes. So it's not arrogant, it's actually compassionate. If it's true, yeah. Danny?
Usually, an illustration, is it arrogant to tell someone their house is burning down, to get out before they get killed? That's not arrogant.
Yeah.
You're insisting on absolutely.
Okay, good.
Thing if what's at stake again.
Right. The consequences. Yeah.
But I feel that other people also tell us for our well-being that, that they might sound arrogant for us because they think that they have the way, but they're only doing it for our own well-being. So I feel like it goes back and forth.
Okay, so it comes down ultimately to what is true. Chris?
I think a really good step to take is to tell a person, hey, this is the problem. Like Dan said, your house is burning down. So you say the same thing, like tell them, the same people, I'm going to tell you this, but so will the Muslim, and so will the Jehovah's Witness. So you need to go in there and pick and choose as if you had to pick, like a cell phone plan or something, and do the pros and cons, saying, well, how does this add up to real life? Because otherwise you're just kind of sinking in, kind of in between, and you don't know what to do. You're not coming to any conclusion, so
Yeah.
that is, you're just watching your house burn down. You need to find the right answer.
Yeah, like you remember in John Frame's book, he gives the conversation with a guy where the guy claims to be an agnostic, and he says, well, you should go to church every other week, right? You should, if you don't know, you should live that way and find out what's right. One logical response to this is really to charge Christian exclusivism with arrogance is essentially an ad hominem attack, against the man. Okay, so you're dealing with the attitude of the person. You're not dealing with the issue of whether it's true or not. You're shifting the discussion to the attitude rather than the issue, the facts, the real argument. You could also say that the pluralist is equally guilty of arrogance. How so? Chris?
Saying there is no absolutes, absolutely.
Okay.
You're claiming to have so much knowledge that you've looked in every single corner to tell me that there is no truth.
Okay. And religious pluralism is really not as inclusive as it appears to be, because it excludes all forms of religious exclusivism. Follow that? Mm-hmm. So religious pluralism presents itself as this, every religion is welcome and very inclusive, except if your religion is exclusive, then yeah. So you could throw it back and say, well, that's kind of an arrogant position. Keller says, ironically, the insistence that doctrines do not matter, for example, all religions are equally valid and basically teach the same thing, is really a doctrine itself. It holds a specific view of God which is touted as superior and more enlightened than the beliefs of most major religions. And I think Celeste's point here is also very helpful, that if the Christian message is true, then it's not an arrogant thing to evangelize people and to tell them about the Lord Jesus. It is a compassionate, loving thing. Okay, what about, sometimes you'll hear the objection that your belief in Christianity is just culturally conditioned. For example, in the recent documentary Collision between Douglas Wilson and Christopher Hitchens, Wilson admits the main reason, or a big factor in why he is a Christian, is because of his upbringing. He was raised in a Christian home, loving Christian parents who lived Christ before him, and that's a big reason why he's a Christian. So some might say, if you lived in Saudi Arabia, you'd be a Muslim. Your religious beliefs are the product of your upbringing. That, by the way, is why Richard Dawkins and Hitchens say that it's a form of child abuse to tell people about God. To tell kids, I mean. So what would you say in response?
Well, you could say, the person asking the question, if they grew up there, they would have been a Muslim too. So,
right.
Not a really valid argument.
Right. You could say if you grew up in Saudi Arabia, you wouldn't be a religious pluralist.
That's also culture.
Yeah. Nelson?
You can also say that you still would have to question it, and if you can, I don't know, I'd say I question why I believe what I believe, and say that it adds up from a Christian perspective.
Okay.
To like other perspectives.
Okay, so you still have to weigh the issues. Is that what you're saying? Whether it's true or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Chris?
I think one thing you can also do is bring it back to the person. They try to talk about, what about all the people? What about, the person who grew up in Africa that was a Muslim, or why don't you you need to bring it back to that person that said, you call yourself an individual thinker. You have the responsibility to find the truth. There have been great men and that have chosen Christianity, and great thinkers. I wouldn't call them great men, but like Dawkins, Darwin, who were Christians who decided not to because they called themselves free thinkers. Where are you? I mean, you're just kind of wallowing if you're not making up your mind. And you need to make a stance for one side or the other and to use the best of the evidence.
Okay, very good.
I would say that we can't base morality off of our culture. Look at the Hitler Youth. They were taught to hate and to kill Jews.
Okay.
Just like in the Rwandan genocide, they were brought up to hate the other
Yeah.
tribe, whichever tribe you were. So you can't say just because you were brought up a certain
Yes.
that's right or wrong.
Right. So this is actually what Sire would call the genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy is simply trying to refute a position by discrediting the way in which it came to be believed. Again, as you all have been pointing out, it doesn't deal with the truth question. Is it true or is it false? It's just, again, shifting the issue. Like the previous one, arrogant, that's an ad hominem. It shifts the issue. It doesn't deal with the truth question. This doesn't deal with the question. So it's a genetic fallacy. Religious pluralism is also a product of our culture. So if everything is culturally conditioned, if all our beliefs are culturally conditioned, why should I listen to you?
Or if everything is culturally conditioned, how did doctrine show up? How did C.S. Lewis change his mind? How did everything is
Right.
culturally conditioned? How do we have independent thinking?
Right. And certainly America and the West in general is no longer, you can't really call these places Christian anymore. There's such diversity of belief. So we might ask people then, what should we base our beliefs on? If it isn't what we were raised with, what should we base our beliefs on? What now, don't tell me what you would say. What do you think people in general say to that? Jeremy?
How you feel?
Okay. If it's good for me. Yeah. Again, this isn't theoretical. We saw these students saying these kinds of things, right? Experience. Makes me feel good. What's good for me. How would you respond to that? Makes me feel good, then that's right. How would you respond to that?
As a presuppositional, show how that would work if we'll say it, or just asking some questions, like say, well, what if I feel it's in my interest to steal your money?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Right.
How does it doesn't work? That's a rule.
Hitler thought it was good for him and other Germans to kill Jews.
Well, there was someone that did say that during the thing about how, like, what's wrong for him on one, like, the person above him could have a totally different view.
Yeah.
I don't see a response to that besides change your whole worldview.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You know, some people think that murdering is good. Some people think that stealing is good. It's good for them. If I steal all your money, that's good for me. It's not so good for you, but it's good for me. Robbie?
C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity talked about how morality transcends feelings. He called them impulses. He said in any given situation, like if someone's drowning, you could feel more than one impulse at the same time. Like you feel the need to go rescue that person, but you could also feel the danger if you put yourself in peril. He says your morality is what helps you decide between those different impulses or feelings.
Right, and that's a third dimension, right? It's not just instinct. It's an arbitrator. It's your conscience. Yeah. Well, other people might say we should base our beliefs on what is good for others. Okay, now that sounds much more noble than what's good for me. But what's the problem with that? What's good for others? Well, doctors used to think that bloodletting was good for their patients. Communists think that communism is good for others.
You'd actually have to know the moral code that you want them to abide by, and you'd have to know a ton in order to really actually help the person. And like communism, say, they actually thought they were helping. Most people think they're helping their countries. Chavez in Venezuela thinks he's helping his country.
Yeah. Yeah. So ultimately, our beliefs ought to be based on what? Truth. It comes back again to the truth issue. And it's so amazing that we've gotten to this point in our culture where we think truth is relative. It just shows you how skewed our thinking has become. As we don't operate that way in real life, but in order to avoid the implications of Christian exclusivity and the sovereignty and authority of God, we have to say ridiculous things. And we, intelligent people, say them. It shows, it's a testimony to our moral blindness that we say these things. Okay, now, what about this objection to Christian exclusivism? It's unfair. Yeah, see? Don gave us some statistics lots of people have never heard. So it's unfair. What would you say? Chris?
I just told you, what are you going to do about it?
Okay.
Let's start with you.
Okay. Don't just put this as a theoretical discussion. It's a personal issue.
If it really was as important as you're making it out to be, if it really were being justified, then tell everybody, you should make up your mind, and then we should work together to let more people know.
Okay. What else might you say? Nelson?
There is justice in the end.
Okay. God is just.
Once again, this is not looking at if the argument is true or not. It's just looking at the implications of it. You know?
Okay. Yeah, it's more of an emotional issue, but that's a real issue to deal with. And I think there is actually a theological answer here. Nelson, I think, is on the right track. I think we can say that people are not condemned because they have not heard of Christ, but for the sinful rejection, should be of the revelation they do have. Okay, so people who have never heard of Christ, they're not condemned for not having that revelation. They're condemned because they are sinners who deserve God's judgment, who have willfully rejected the revelation that is available to them in nature. That's Romans 1 says everyone's been given enough revelation to render them without excuse. They can't say, well, you never provided any revelation or evidence that you exist. No, it's all around them, and they reject it they suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Remember, is the way Romans 1 puts it. If a person really wanted to be reconciled to God, God inevitably would make sure that they heard the message. And Ravi Zacharias, for example, says in closed countries, that is closed to Christianity, Muslim countries, for example, it's amazing how many times that people speak of having a dream about Jesus or something like that, and that's the first step along the way to getting the gospel. Now, let's turn it around and deal with some problems with pluralism. What are some problems with pluralism? We've talked about this a lot already. Our presentations have dealt with it, but what would be a major problem with pluralism? Okay, inconsistent. Do you want to elaborate on that? In the sense that people don't live like pluralists, is that what you mean? They might hold to it as an idea about religion, but in real life they don't actually operate as relativists in many areas. Yeah. Good? Well, certainly it's illogical. Religions make contradictory truth claims. So to say that, as we heard on the student interviews, I think it was the very first guy, he said, well, God exists for some people and he doesn't exist for other people, and both are true. Yeah, Adam?
I was going to say, it might be even offensive to many people of different religions to say to a Jew that Jesus is the Messiah.
Yeah.
Just believe it. That's offensive to him.
Yes.
And for a Muslim to say to me that Jesus isn't the Christ, that he isn't the Savior, he didn't die on the cross, that's offensive to me.
Yes.
And for a Muslim, if I were, anything else, if you say the Jews are the chosen people, they're mad.
Oh, yeah. And that's a good point, because religious pluralism is trying to be, nice. But in the end, you're right, it ends up being very offensive because it levels all these truth claims and says, well, Islam's just as good as Christianity. Religions are mutually exclusive. For example, just to add what's been said already, Islam does not believe Jesus died on the cross. For Christianity, Jesus' death on the cross is absolutely central. It's the heart of the gospel, along with the resurrection, of course. And so to say that Jesus didn't die on a cross, that invalidates our entire belief system. Judaism is still looking for their Messiah. Christianity claims he's here. Those are very opposite claims. Some of Hinduism is pantheistic. Everything is God. Some is panentheistic. God is in everything. Buddhism is usually atheistic or non-theistic. And of course, all of that conflicts with the exclusivism or the monotheism of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. So it's simply illogical. We have to move quickly. It's unlivable. Pluralism doesn't work. Other areas of life, we've talked about this at length: mathematics, the law courts, justice system, sports. Either one team wins or loses. Of course, I think in kiddie soccer now they don't keep score, so it just doesn't matter, right? Everyone wants to have a good self-esteem. At work, let's say your boss said you didn't have a job, and you say, yes, I do have a job. I mean, one of you's right, one of you's wrong. Usually the one issuing the paycheck is. Lots of other examples. Now, a person's belief does not have the power to make something true. A person's belief either corresponds to reality or not. They will also say, religious pluralists will also say that there is a fundamental ethical agreement among all religions. And so we should just embrace all religions because they're all basically about the same morality. They help people to be less self-centered. So that's good. How would you respond to that?
You read the Quran?
Yeah. If you're a Muslim, if Islam is true, that affects how you treat other non-Muslims. Terrorism and murder are justified for certain readings of the Quran, right? Okay, so your belief about ultimate reality shapes how you live. It does shape morality, and there is contradictory morality as well. Our time's basically up, but here's what we really as believers, need to focus on. This is the kind of thing we need to emphasize, and that is the uniqueness of Christ and the Christian message. And Sean did a good job at the conclusion of his presentation showing the uniqueness of Christ among the religions. Only Christ has risen from the dead. He has unique authority. And we can actually focus on the uniqueness of Christian theology, because you look out on the world, there's this problem of sin, whatever you want to call it, if you think sin is too offensive. That things are not the way they're supposed to be. We recognize that. So what is each religion's solution to that problem? Well, you just try and better yourself, try to help others. Does that really deal with the problem? And so the amazing story of the incarnation of God Himself taking on flesh, going to the cross, taking His sins upon Himself in order to reconcile us. We're saved not through what we do, but by grace. Other religions, every other religion ultimately is about what you do. So the uniqueness of Christ and the Christian message, we need to think about. This is why doctrine is so important. Knowing Christian doctrine, biblical doctrine, is so crucial, because this is what sets Christianity apart. And we need to see the beauty of the doctrines and not just think of them at the intellectual level as, interesting, deep theology, but as beautiful doctrines, and know how to present them winsomely and compellingly.